Now, I recently got talking to some of our elders from Alabama. One who was 101 year old and still had a memory that's as sharp as a tack. Well, they got to tell me some Hank stories and things. And then one about a mountain witch that was so powerful, said folks was too scared to even let her name pass across their lips. Now, these folks knew her name, but said I didn't want to know it, and I agreed with them. 'Cause they said the last person they recalled that ever said her name woke up the next morning with boils and blisters and sores all over their mouth and tongue. But now, said all the local folks back in, said they all knowed her as Old Rags, 'cause she always wore a cloak-looking thing and looked like it was just, sewn together with just old rags. Said she was kind of a short woman, and boy, said she just radiated evil. But now they said that, a lot of their family knowed her family. They said when she was a little bitty gal, she was sweet as honey. Said always played with the other gals and things. Just pretty as a doll. Well, when she got older, she fell in love with a feller and done everything under the sun for him, waited on him hand and foot, done everything to make him happy. And he took her heart and shattered it by leaving her for her cousin. Well, said that sent her in a fit of rage, and said she just couldn't take the pain from him. So she went to see an old witch. Said the old witch told her that she couldn't give her his love back, but she could offer her revenge. Now, I reckon it weren't long after that, her cousin and that feller's hair and teeth started falling out. Just anything bad you could think of started happening to them. The folks around town would laugh at them, stuff like that. And Old Rags, she was mighty happy with that outcome. But she wanted to be able to do things like that herself. So she asked that old mountain witch to teach her, and she learned from her. But that weren't good enough. No, she didn't stop there. Said she sold everything she had or get her hands on to travel. Said she even went to the old countries and sought out some of their most powerful witches and learned from each one of them. Then she heard about a woman who was mighty powerful with a magic called voodoo. And she even went and learned some from her. Then she started mixing the crafts. But then she started changing. Said she was a different person altogether. Said even her eyes turned from a deep blue to an icy gray. Said her hair started turning from black to white. Wrinkles ate her up. Said when she was 40, said she looked 90. Said she lived down at the end of a holler. Said about a quarter mile after the last homestead before hers. Said the trees looked dead. Weren't no grass that would grow, flowers, and even weeds. It was just dirt. Looked like a wasteland. They said she'd sit with her front door open, and sit in an old rocking chair just inside the doorway and look out. Said weren't nothing unusual to see her stop like a wild animal if she was walking by somewhere and start smelling the air. Sometimes she'd do that and just start laughing, and then turn and go back in the way she was coming, or just veer off through the woods. And, young as being young'uns, a teenage boy was trying to impress a gal once, and said he was going to go stand in front of her house and chuck a rock at it. They said to this very day, they don't know exactly what he's seen or what happened. They said that boy come walking back up the road, white-headed, mouth gaped open, and for the rest of his days, said he just sat and stared at nothing, said oftentimes screaming out top of his lungs. Sometimes folks had to come together and hold his arms and legs down, because he'd go into fits. One day they said she just up and just left the area, so nobody knowed where she went. But some folks believe, well, she was so powerful, she's still alive to this very day.
It's known as the Slate Belt Owlman. It's said to look like a really large owl crossed with a human. It's got large red or brownish red eyes and very long, awkward-looking human legs. It's said to stand at about 6 feet tall. Well, back in March of 2024, now this is why it excites me, a fan wrote me telling me about some sightings in her area of a new type of cryptid that I should check out. She sent me some links to a couple stories. And then I found the original post and got permission to share this fella's story. And here it is. Hey, everybody. I just wanted to reach out and inform you all of this. I live near Bangor, and I was heading home from work last night. I usually go through Martins Creek. I was driving on 611 at about 9 o'clock p.m. at night. As I was passing the Alpha Cement building right next to the quarry, to my surprise, I saw what I thought was the shadow of a large owl sitting on top of a stump or a fence post on the right side of the road. It scared me at first because the way it was sitting made it look like it was like 6 feet tall. I started going a little slower to take a photo of it, but as I got closer, it suddenly opened its wings, and to my surprise, it was massive. Its eyes were like reddish brown, not even with light reflecting on it. It was very bizarre. It looked like a man put on an owl costume, and the head was human-shaped. It then took off up near the trees, and that stump or fence post was not something it was sitting on, but it was its legs. So it had to be almost 6 feet tall. The legs were like a person's legs, and the way it was standing when I was driving before, it had its wings tucked around the bottom of its legs, and its head into the top of its wings. I couldn't see the color of it. It looked black because it was dark, but I thought it had some light brown to it. It shocked me so much, I tried to take photos of it, but it took off above the tree line towards the Howell Road behind me. I have no idea if it is an animal that you guys can tell me more about, or if I just saw some kind of weird, massive owl. I just wanted to inform you all of this. I know we all have small cats and dogs in the area. I also was just wondering if anyone else in the area had heard of or seen anything weird that night. Thank you so much. I've never seen an animal quite like this before. The now defunct Lakeshore Mental Institution in Knoxville, Tennessee. I had just celebrated my 10th birthday on December 2002, and my grandmother had a friend named Kristen that worked at the institution. Now, being a kid, obviously, I wasn't allowed inside, and my grandmother had always been vigilant while on the premises. Kristen had called my grandmother one night and said that her car broke down at work and she needed a ride home. Naturally, my grandmother, being friends with Kristen, agreed to go and help her, and we took off at about 9 o'clock p.m. that night, which was when her shift ended. When we got there, we were met by security, whom we told why we were there to the guard, and he simply just said, "Okay, in and out." We went to the main door and waited for Kristen. After about 15 minutes, she came out and asked my grandma to help carry her stuff out. My grandma agreed and told me to just stay in the car. I did as she asked. They went inside and I stayed outside. About 3 minutes passed and a guy in a green hospital gown knocked on my window. I cracked it to see what it was he wanted. He didn't say anything at first, and I asked, "Are you okay, mister?" And then he just said, "Ronald." My name is Cody, so I assume he was Ronald. I didn't really know. He had a black beard and what appeared to be a scar on his lip, with curly black hair on his head. He pointed down to the center console of the car, and I noticed there was a dime sitting on it. I looked at him and he kept pointing at the dime, so I picked it up to hand to him, but I accidentally dropped it. When I reached to pick it up, I looked back and the man was gone. Kristen was there instead, and my grandma was getting in the driver's side. I looked around the car, but he was gone, like he was never even there at all. On the way home, I asked Kristen who Ronald was. She had no idea who I was talking about. I described him to her, and she thought, but didn't say anything else for a few minutes. About a week later, she asked me if I remembered what the man looked like and asked me if he had a scar on his lip, which he did. When I said yes, she turned white. Tell me at the time, but told my grandmother, whom told me several years later. The man I had seen apparently had died at the hospital a week prior to that incident and had been really mad with his father who had him committed. His father's name was Ronald. What did I see there that night? So, about 10 years ago, I was working at a haunted hospital in Roanoke, Virginia. The hospital was already being used for outpatient medical care. I won't bore you with all the details, so you'll just have to trust me when I say that we had a very annoying ghost who liked to watch people through the panes of a glass. He was a peeping Tom, basically. He most often was seen looking through the security window and fire doors. However, he began coming out to the glass wall office area where I worked. And I would often see him out of the corner of my eye standing on the other side of the glass wall from me, watching me. Anytime I would turn and look, he would, of course, not be there. With this ghost came a very distinct odor. The best way to describe it would be wet cigars, sour sweat, and basement funk. This ghost looked like a small black man wearing a stone washed, padded shoulder denim jacket in a style that was popular in the 1980s. Because of the distinct odor, he was given the name Funky McNasty. So after 5:30 p.m., there were only a few people in the building, and after 9 p.m. until about 6:30 a.m., there was just one officer on site. So one night, I arrived for my midnight shift to find a police team with guns drawn preparing to breach the building. Apparently, there had been an attempted break in, and a new trainee officer was sheltering in place upstairs where they had called 911. I came in with the team to check the area, and then contact my officer and send the police up to meet with them there while the others swept the rest of the building. Within 30 minutes, the building was given an all clear. The police officer had a cadet with them, and this young trainee was absolutely adamant that she had seen a small black man on the other side of the glass wall in the lobby area. She insisted that she had seen him standing there by the elevator watching as they came into the foyer, and as soon as they made eye contact, he bolted down the hallway to the left. They asked for permission to open the search to all of the offices in the corridor to make sure he hadn't gone into any of them. I unlocked the doors and let them search the rooms at the end of the hallway. The cadet had seen him all the way at the end of the hallway inside a glass wall corridor office. And so we also searched that room. She did not know how he had gotten in there, but thought it had been left unlocked. He had gone in and locked it and hidden under a desk. So this area was searched and nothing was found. Following the search, she was adamant to her superior that she had seen him, and I felt terrible that I couldn't explain to her that the small black man in the jean jacket had been a resident ghost that she was trying to chase.
June 2016, Aberdeen, Ohio. I was working the night shift at my local Taco Bell when I had one of the scariest moments in my life that I have ever experienced. It was 10 o'clock at night. The place was a graveyard. I was working the drive-thru that night. We hadn't had a customer in hours, so I was catching up on some cleaning. Suddenly, there was a loud, static sound over my drive-thru headphones. So loud I had to take them off. I checked the camera. Nothing was there. So I went about my business. I then started getting the feeling somebody was watching me. Shortly after, my coworker comes from the back and lets out a shriek. I turned to see a girl with jet black hair staring at the drive-thru window facing us. My coworker and I looked at each other in disbelief. We then hear the girl speak in a voice that still sends chills down me to this day. May I come in? My coworker and I stood there for a moment, not knowing what to say. I then responded, "Sorry, miss, the restaurant's closed for the night. We're only taking orders to the drive-thru." Then the girl replies, "Please let me come in. I really need to use the bathroom." My coworker then looks at me and whispers, "Dude, maybe we should just let her in. She's just a kid." I shake my head no. Something just feels off about this whole thing. I mean, what's a 10 or 11-year-old girl doing standing out in a drive-thru at 10 p.m. on a Wednesday night? I responded to the girl, "I'm sorry, we cannot let anyone in. We've closed the restaurant for the night." After a moment of silence, the girl starts banging on the window, shouting, "Let me in, let me in." I look at my coworker and ask, "What should we do?" He responded, "I don't know. Call the police?" The girl then stops and stares at us, and that's when we see it. A set of pitch black eyes. After a few moments of silence, we hear a voice. It sounds like it's coming from 1,000 miles away. "Hello?" We look in the direction it's coming from, the drive-thru window headset. We walk over to it, turning our backs to the girl. I responded, "Hello?" The man on the other end responds, "Yes. Can I have 2 5-layer burritos?" My coworker then shouts, "Oh my God, she's gone." I turn, look at the girl, who was nowhere to be seen. After serving the guy in the drive-thru, my coworker and I began searching the internet on my phone, only to find we had just had an encounter with a black-eyed kid. Now, I said, this is a story about an encounter with green eyes in the Chickamauga battlefield. This is straight from my uncle and his own words. I said, well, it was 1973, and I was working 2 jobs to help my mother with some bills and my own bills, and I was saving up for the new Chevy Nova that came out last year. The girl I was dating at the time was working too, and she didn't get off work till around 10 or 10:30 that night. So as it happened, one weekend we had the night off at the same time, and I had just gotten my Nova. So we wanted to show it off and everything, and being a young couple, wanted to have a little time to themselves. He said, we decided to go to the Chickamauga battlefield and just kind of hang out. Because that's, it was usually pretty quiet back then. And it was real late and stuff. So, well, as we sat there, as we sat there, as the night grew on, we reminisced and talked and stuff and laughed. So we was talking about how eerie it was without the crowd of people being there, the general public. Well, she had scooted over next to me, and I put my arm around her. When out of the corner of my eye, in the rearview mirror, I see a set of glowing green eyes. I jerked my head around and looked, and they were just staring at me, menacingly and piercing. I suddenly felt the emotions wash over me of dread and, strangely, sadness. But what had me the most was absolute and sheer terror. I screamed, which in turn scared my girlfriend as she screamed, not even knowing why. When I turned around, started the engine, dropped it in gear, and punched it. We headed out of there, spinning tires, throwing grass and gravel. We was going down the road, which is limited to just a few miles an hour, but we was going wide open. Looking in my rearview mirror, the green eyes is still there. And by that time, my girlfriend had turned around and saw them too. When we got to the exit, they had vanished. But needless to say, we didn't slow down till we got near town. The end.
So I was with my group on an investigation at St. Albans Sanitarium. I was watching the monitors with the group, and 2 of the ladies from our group came back from where they were supposed to be. I was sitting there watching them on the camera, and I heard them coming down the hallway. This struck me as very odd since they hadn't moved from where they were at. They were still in the room where they were supposed to be. At the same time, they came up and looked at me and said, "I've seen people." Then they turned around and walked back. There were 3 other people in the group that witnessed this. I can't explain what happened, but this was incredibly freaky. We were pretty sure they were doppelgangers. Greetings, Spooky Appalachia and Jared King TV. My name is Ron, and I recently found both of your channels. I enjoy both of you and the work you do together. I wanted to send this along in hopes that you guys can use it. If you enjoy, I have plenty more where this came from that I'll be sending. My story goes back to 1974 on the Kentucky-Virginia line. I got up about 4:30 a.m. to go hunting. I've been an avid hunter my entire life, just like my father and his father before him. I gather my gear and head to my pickup truck with a cup of coffee, excited for a morning hunt. I load my gear up in the back and stick my rifle in the cab. I start to back out of the driveway when I notice strange lights in the sky. I stopped and just glared at it for a few minutes. It was orange, green, red, and white in color. Its size would fluctuate. I shrug it off, thinking it may have been an airplane, and pull off into the road. As I'm driving, I usually met with some light traffic from people going to work. Not this morning. This morning was strangely different. I pull on to the road my hunting area is on, and then just pull off the road back into the woods about 300 foot and park. I get out and begin grabbing my gear and rifle. There was an eeriness about the woods that morning. Still dark. Moon was barely shining and light fog. The woods seemed lonely. I've never felt like that before, ever. Suddenly, the lights in the sky appeared just above me, about treetop height, and begins to get lower. I began to tremble. They lower, making a bizarre humming sound, and then silence, except for what sounded like things walking all around me in the darkness. And then that stops too. A beam shines down on me from the multicolored lights, and from what I can best describe, a very tall, slim, silver being walks to the center of the beam. I'm almost paralyzed from shock and awe at this point. There, about 20 feet from me, stands this silver being with no features whatsoever. Then a voice comes from it and says, "I shall return again." And then I wake up in my truck, only now it's daylight and about 10 a.m. I never told anyone about this for more than 20 years in fear of what I would be called and thought of. What if they know I said something and then come back? Because so far, they haven't returned, as far as I know, not to me anyway. However, technically it said it would return. It never said when. Thank you both for not judging people for their experiences they can't explain. It's nice to know we have somewhere we can go people will believe us. I highly encourage others to share their experiences to these fellas. They truly are genuine. So again, thank you so much, Spooky Appalachia and Jared King TV. God bless you both. Sincerely.
Back in the 1970s, there was a young woman who got in a car crash, and it ended up taking her life. And her parents was very sad, as any parent would be. And they identified her and everything like that. And they had her funeral and buried her. It was about 6 months later, and said a man came, knocked on the door, saying they had their daughter in the car outside and needed a ride back home, and that, they thought it was some kind of sick joke. Said they was, went outside to look in the car and nothing. Said they told him to get lost, thinking it was just some kind of sick joke. Well, there was a man said that he was out driving one night. Said he stopped at a gas station to fill up the truck. And said he was asking the guy at the gas station how far it was to get where he was going. And if he'd show him, the road he was going to be going down. Well, the old man stopped him before he could finish what he was going to be saying. He said, "Wow, I wouldn't go that way if I was you." Said, this is about 2 years after that happened. Well, he asked him why. And he said about 2 years back, a woman had been killed on that road. So he said, "Oh, I don't believe in all that stuff." Well, old man said, "Well, I can't stop you," and showed him the way. But said, "Whatever you do, don't stop to pick nobody up on that road." He paid and left, put gas in the truck, and off down the road he went. Said he drove for about 20-30 miles. Said he was coming around a curve in the road. He said he seen a woman standing in the road flagging him down. Well, he stopped and asked her, what she needed. She said her car broke down and asked him if he would give her a ride to her parents' house. Said it was about 10 miles up the road. He was going that way anyway, so he said, yeah, sure, come on, I can give you a ride. Well, no, he said, yeah, come on, I can give you a ride. Not seeing a broken down car anywhere, but said he didn't think much of it. At the time, he was just thinking, well, she didn't, say anything out of the way, so he didn't think much about it. He was just thinking about getting her home. Well, he pulled into the driveway of the house. She told him to go knock on the door. He got out of the car and but she didn't. He thought it was kind of weird that she didn't get out of the car too, but he went and knocked on the door, and a man answered. Said he told him he had their daughter in the car. Said she'd broke down. Well, the man stopped him, told him to get out of there, kick rocks. Said they're sick and tired of them sick jokes. He said, what are you talking about, sir? She's in my truck right there, look. So he looked back at his truck, and nothing. So the man slammed the door in his face. Well, that being said, the man went back to his truck. Nobody being in it, kind of freaked out when he got back in his truck and hightailed it out of there. But he went back the other way, and thinking about the situation, he knows he didn't take his eyes off the road but for a split second to look at the man and the door. So, it weren't time enough for somebody to get out and hide. Well, he drove about 10 miles, and he finally came back to the curve in the middle of the road. And there she was, standing there trying to flag him down again. Said it scared him about half to death, and said he floored it. Said he drove home, driving the whole time thinking about what happened. Well, said he went back to that gas station, and come to find out, the old man that told him about what happened at the road there was the man that originally picked her up 6 months after she died, and told him about what happened at the beginning of the story. After he left the gas station, said he never went back around there again. He said he didn't care if anybody believed him or not. He said he seen what he seen. People may say, whatever they want. But people do say at night you can still see that woman trying to flag people down.
My husband and I live in Appalachia, and he works as a park ranger. This means that he spends a lot of time in the woods of Appalachia at night. He doesn't really believe in ghosts, but one night he had an experience that was spooky even to him. He was making his rounds when he got a call from another park ranger. She sounded really scared and concerned. So she asked him to come to the park that she was closing. So he drove up there to find that she had been waiting for him in her car at the gate for about 30 minutes. She had been too terrified to wait in the headquarters building. It turns out that she was outside the building after locking up, and the lights inside the headquarters had suddenly turned on by themselves, followed by the outside porch lights. And there was no one there. She had just been inside. My husband accompanied her, and they did a sweep of the building and its surroundings, but no one was there, and there was no sign of forced entry or an exit. My husband walked back to his car where the windows were suddenly fogged up. This wasn't a gradual fog. It was sudden. And it was very thick fog too. No matter what he did, he couldn't get rid of the fog, even when using his windshield wiper. He actually had to drive out of the park almost completely blinded due to the fog. As he reached the exit, he saw something strange standing in the road. I believe he rolled down his window to see it, and it was a very large deer just standing there staring at him. not moving. That could have been a coincidence, but he said it gave him an eerie feeling. And that, with combined with everything else that was going on, was just plain spooky. The second he left the park property, the windows suddenly unfogged and he could see perfectly again. He told me about this experience as soon as he came home because he knows I love spooky things. And even though he doesn't believe, he admitted that his experience was pretty weird.
Sparing boring details, I've been an active psychic my entire life. I grew up in a haunted house and learned to deal with my paranormal world from a very early age. Not much phases me these days. So, this was July of 2020, when I got to have one of my few experiences I would dub as a terrifying one for me. I was in the hospital having outpatient reconstructive surgery. So, while I was there, waiting to begin, I noticed some unusual phenomena. Small objects made of light, orbs flying around in a couple of places and moving through the ventilation system, which I thought was very strange. This was in pre-op area, and I was not medicated at the time. So time later, following the surgical procedure, I was in a private recovery room with my spouse, awake and very bored. We was waiting on the doctor to release me and wondering if I could, see anything else. I noticed that if I tried to stare in a way that makes spirits stand out, I could actually see what appeared to be a translucent membrane moving as if it was stirred by a breeze. Something moving very close to me and sometimes far away. I couldn't figure out what it was. I couldn't keep it in constant view as it kept moving in this gentle breeze like kind of like a sail. I sensed the closeness of the other world and figured out this could possibly be the veil that separates our world from the other side. Whatever it was, it had a pattern like an elephant hide or skin, kind of like texture. Gold and silver highlights with a bluish gray shadow. Whenever I could see it, I tried to study it as much as possible. It was fascinating. And I was determined to memorize what I was looking at to help me research exactly what it was. Now, by this point in time, I was completely cleared of the anesthesia and other medications except for perhaps the painkillers. I was lucid and finally cleared to go home. We were simply just waiting on the wheelchair transport to take me to the car. The hospital was swarmed with all the post-lockdown surgeries, so everything was taking longer. Well, suddenly I got the feeling of immense power in the area. Something I knew meant to be and passive as something you might not want to be seen by about. At the same time, I heard a deep in the chest rumbling growl, not a snarl. I was trying to look at this veil material in front of me. So the veil was between me and the open hospital door, looking out into the busy corridor where the growl was coming. My immediate thought was somebody was moving heavy equipment like a tool chest down the hall. But the sound was organic and yet not right for any animal I knew. I was still staring at the veil, so I instantly switched my focus to the hall and watched in shock as into a view silhouette of a smoke-colored, vaguely wolf-like canine charged across the doorway. It seemed slightly larger and much thicker than a German shepherd, with a deep chest, stocky neck, and a shaggy mane of hair around its broad, heavy shoulders. The body was lean and tucked up to the solid hips. The tail was straight out behind it like a wolf as it ran. The muzzle was too kind of pointed for a wolf, though, more like a Doberman, but with a solid jaw and sloped forehead. I can make out no features, unfortunately, only the shadow of it, as if it was cut out in a shadow. It was gone in an instant, but burned in my mind. I could vaguely hear it for a moment more, going down the hall, and then just silence. I knew the coldness in my gut, the electricity. I could feel that this was indeed a hellhound, and that it was here for somebody. I didn't know anything about what was going on the ward, but a moment later I heard a commotion at the far end of the hallway. A lot of loud talking, mostly female voices, some male, and then perhaps 30 seconds of my seeing this creature. There was a code blue called on the end of the hallway, and then more commotion. Then people with a crash cart going down the hallway, and the sounds of things happening. Then quiet. And a little later, transport came to take me from the ward, and I don't know what happened after that. About 4 years ago, my daughter and I were traveling through a small town of Silverton, toward Little Mount Angel where we live. It was broad daylight, and everything seemed pretty much normal. And it was a beautiful and peaceful summer day, except for the fact that I had a sudden strange premonition of danger. As we were passing the local grocery store, we saw a young man up ahead, to our right, sticking out his thumb for a ride. This kid looked to be around 17 years old, and he had like windswept strawberry blonde hair. His hair was beautiful, like the hair Americans had before the food we eat was stripped of most of its nutrients in these modern times. Amazing hair. Well, we noticed his clothing was very outdated, right down to his shoes. I mean, like the 80s or more like the late 1970s. His hairstyle was authentic to the same time as well. This young man had his head down, cast to the ground, and would not look up at any cars. We noticed that no one was picking him up or even looking at him. We believe that we were the only people who saw him as far as we were aware. Everyone else seemed just oblivious to him. Otherwise, I'm certain somebody would have stopped and helped him. People are very kind and trusting in our neck of the woods. So, as we were approaching him, we began to slow our speed in order to possibly give him a lift. We could feel him literally directing his energy towards us as we got closer. Through his eyes, they were still downcast on the road. Then something checked me on the inside that you just keep moving. At the same time, my daughter, who was 14 at the time, said, "No, Mama." I decided to obey what I know to be the Lord's voice and kept rolling. As we passed him, we noticed that his skin was very strange. The color was just off. His eyes remained on the road, but he then lifted his eyes, just enough for us to recognize that he had no eyes. Just blackness. Not even shiny black eyeballs in his sockets, just darkness and space. We decided to drive faster and noticed that he did not turn around as we continued on our way. However, he did project his energy towards us with a power that was not natural. We knew that this young man was nobody to associate with. We left him there on the side of the road, still sticking his thumb out. After getting a little ways down the road, we looked back through our rearview mirror and saw that he was just gone. At that, we began to praise Jesus all the way home and afterwards too. That night, we went to sleep with peace in our hearts, knowing that God had kept us safe as we had obeyed him. It was late summer night, about 11:30 p.m. in August 1974. I was about 17 years old at the time. I was driving to my home in Nace, Virginia, which is located between Troutville and Buchanan. I was coming home from my girlfriend's house in Salem on Route 11, passing through Troutville. Coming into Troutville, I had noticed some relatively low lights and thought it might be a plane making an approach to the Woodrum Field in Roanoke. All of a sudden, I realized that the lights didn't seem to be moving, and I began to slow down until I came to a dead stop right in the middle of town, in front of the old Troutville Elementary School. That's when I noticed a dark triangular craft about 150 feet right above me, with a bright light on each corner. My anxiety was rising fast, and I felt the hair on my arms and neck standing up. I rolled down my window on my '63 Oldsmobile and leaned very far out and looked straight up. I was immediately impressed at the size of this craft, and it was at least as long and wide as a football field. I also noticed there was no engine, no motor sounds, but only a deep humming from the craft. It was so intense that I could actually feel the humming in my body. Now, I was completely at a loss as to what I was seeing or what I should do. I had a weapon in the car, and a quick thought passed through my mind that I should get it, but thankfully that went away quick as it come. This was when the fear crept in, and I realized how actually close to this craft I was, and there had been no cars coming from either direction in the short time that all of this had transpired. Erratic thoughts started racing through my mind. Would he try to hurt me? Or even worse, try to take me? I quickly ducked back into my car and rolled the window up, stepped on the gas. Actually, I floored it and exited Troutville heading north on Route 11 towards my home in Nace. Now, my '63 Oldsmobile was what I called a tank due to its size and being made up almost completely steel. Route 11 is a 4-lane highway there, 2 lanes in each direction, and I had pegged the speedometer at 120 miles an hour, and I was cutting corners. I could see that the craft was still very low and right behind me, following as I sped along. I was very frightened. When I came to the turnoff on my right to go to Nace on a back road, I noticed another car coming from the opposite direction. We passed one another as I slowed down to turn off Route 11, and the other car was proceeding toward Troutville. It was now that I noticed the craft had stopped following me and was following the other car back toward Troutville. While I was glad it was no longer following me, my fear had yet subsided. I continued to speed the rest of the way home. Upon entering the front door of my house, I saw that my mom and dad were still up and immediately noticed the state I was in. I told them what had happened, and I was sure they was going to think I was nuts, but Dad said he had seen several things in the sky out where we lived, and he was really not surprised at my story. 48 years have passed since that night, and I still remember it like it happened last night. I went on to spend 20 years in the Army and only shared this story with about 10 people in that amount of time. I never talked about it a lot because I didn't want to get the looks and hear the comments that I figured would come my way. I have made the judgment as to whether or not this craft was alien or just something from another world or something from this world. I personally believe it was something from another world. The government of our country has finally admitted there are UFOs. but they really have not commented any further. I believe they know very much more about these things, but for some reason, they don't want to share them with the American people. Before this, I was not a believer, but now that they are out there, I wish they were informed of everything ours. Other governments know, but that may not happen in my lifetime. But I still watch the sky, and always will. My booger encounter, 1978. My first encounter, which at the time I didn't think about it involving a Sasquatch, was just a frightening experience that I had no explanation for. It happened one weekend in 1978. While camping with my horse on the north end of Brookville Reservoir property. It began with me deciding to take a weekend camping trip on horseback. I had time on my hands, no money, so it seemed like a good way to, spend my days off. I only worked 4 nights a week, Monday through Thursday. So Friday morning, I packed light camping gear on my saddle, a blanket, ground cloth, canvas bucket, some rope, nose bag for my horse and some oats, pair of hobbles, and an old 1892 Winchester carbine. Carried a scabbard. Had a 1744 caliber cartridges in my carbine. I also had a tin cup, canteen, my food, which consisted of coffee, a can of crazy cheese, and some crackers. It was warm, so I only packed a light denim jacket, changed the socks, and buckskin moccasins that I wore while I was sleeping. I rode about 17 miles that Friday, and toward late afternoon, I began to get into the Brookville Reservoir property. Specifically, the east fork of the Whitewater River began to feed the lake. I left the gravel road that I'd been riding down and moved my horse along an old abandoned roadbed along the river that was no longer accessible to cars or trucks. It was a shadow of its former road, and eventually even that road dwindled away to nothing more than a footpath. I rode into Wood River bottom and looked for a place to camp. I was having a good time. I made camp by tying a picket rope between 2 trees for my mare, then spread out my ground cloth, gathered wood for a fire. Didn't bring no flashlight, so small campfire for coffee and have a little bit of seeing light to do until I turned in, that was all that was necessary. While I made camp, I hobbled my horse and turned her loose. That way she could graze on some tender, sweet spring grass. I will mention here for those who don't know, hobbles are leather straps with a short chain attached to 2 leather ends and are hobbled around the horse's front feet to allow them to, move freely, but stops them from running off. And picture somebody trying to move with their shoelaces tied together. Them's horse hobbles. Anyway, while she grazed, I made a cup of instant coffee, had some crackers and cheese. I then took a paperback book from my saddlebags and laid back with my head on my saddle and read while enjoying a cigarette. Then the light began to fade. I went and called up to my mare, and after removing her hobbles, I led her down to the river on a lead rope to get a drink. This is where the weirdness began. As she was drinking, she suddenly lifted her head from the water, and with her ears held forward, which indicated something had her attention. She looked intently upriver. I naturally followed the line of her interest, strained my eyes in the night, trying to attempt to see what had caught her attention. She was so tense that she hadn't even swallowed a drink of water. She was holding it in her mouth. Sounds of the water was dripping off her mouth back into the river. It was the only sound I heard. Her demeanor had changed as she was now acting spooked. On the way back to camp, she kept stopping and would stare in the gathering darkness in the woods, staring north as she did up the river. I put her hobbles back on her and tied her to the picket rope between two trees by a neck rope and around her neck behind her head and fed down through the halter ring under her chin. Well, this type of tying keeps a horse from hurting itself if they spook while tied. It saves on broken halters. Well, all the while I was getting her situated for the night, she kept acting jumpy and move around nervously. Then would just freeze suddenly motionless and stare upriver. Only her nostrils was moving in an attempt to catch some kind of odor. Well, here I'll give a little background on my horse. She's well-trained mount that was used for working livestock. She was unflappable around traffic, could be safely ridden along the road, including the highways. I also used her on my trap line. She weren't spooked by gunfire neither, or the smell of blood. I owned her until her death, up into her upper 20s. And except for this night camping, she had only been spooked one other time. And that was the first time she heard a wild turkey gobble. What I'm saying is, she was a good, solid mount that I could trust in any situation. Later, I was married later. She'd go on to teach my wife eventually, both my sons, how to ride. Well, after I was sure she was secure, I told her to settle down. And taking a collapsible canvas bucket, I went down to the river to bring her back water for the night. By now, there was just the late stages of twilight left. I could see the water in the far bank. No details of anything. While I was filling the bucket, I suddenly caught the sound of voices coming from upriver. My first thought was, great, I got a bunch of party types nearby. I assumed that what this was, my horse that was hearing. Now, as I said, it sounded like 2 or 3 people were talking, but nothing, they were saying was distinguishable. As much of it as reached my ears sounded like just animal chatter, for lack of a better word. Occasionally I'd stop, hear somebody let out a whoop, and a couple times I heard loud splashes. It's like something heavy had hit the water. I was more irritated than spooked. I only hoped that they would not wander down to my camp. As I was going back to camp, which was only about 40 feet away, my horse suddenly let out a loud whinny, and voices instantly stopped. Now that spooked me. And I assumed that I would soon have people in my camp that I had no interest in meeting. My fire was down to coals, and for some reason, I felt the need to put more wood on it. And yeah, my horse still had not settled down much. She was jittery and was stretching the rope in an attempt to get loose. This is when I took my Winchester out of the saddle scabbard and dug in my saddlebag for the cloth sack that had 10 extra rounds in it. I had 7 in the carbines magazine. I sat by the campfire, occasionally stoking it with wood in order to keep, some light in the camp. Kept talking to my mare to calm her down and attempt, reading my book that I'd brought along, but I could only read a few paragraphs before I'd concentrate on the lighter sounds. I no longer, heard the voices from upriver, but that didn't convince my horse that all was well. She continued to fidget and would let out knickers on occasion. I eventually gave up on reading and sat down next to the fire, leaning again my Winchester, which I had placed between my knees, with the butt of the gun on the ground. Somewhere along 11 or 12 o'clock, sleep overtook me. I drifted off while I was sitting upright, leaning up against my carbine. Around 3 in the morning, I was awoke by all matters of Cain breaking loose. My mare was letting out terrified whinnies and was struggling against the rope to break loose. I think it hadn't been for the hobbles on her front legs, she would have indeed broke free and run. I threw a prepared fire bundle on the campfire, which was now down to coals, as the bundle caught sufficient light I could see. I quickly went over to the mare, tried my best to calm her down. Took a bit of soothing positive talk, but she finally calmed down. Kept her attention toward the dark forest north of the camp. That's when I heard the whistle. Yep, a whistle. Somebody was letting out low whistles north of me, and slightly east toward the river. Well, that confirmed to me somebody, or possibly several someones, was messing with me. I loudly announced that I knew somebody was out there, and they weren't scaring me. Well, that weren't entirely true, as knowing that somebody was close to me did rattle me a bit. But I stepped over my fire and placed wood on it. Then I picked up my Winchester. Having that old carbine in my hands gave me some sort of comfort. This is when I began to hear the footsteps. Whoever was out there in the dark began to walk in a semicircle around my camp. They started at the river and started walking westward, still north of my camp. Then they swung around south and walked to a point where they turned east, and walked to the river south of my camp. Now I know the sound of the forest. Now I know the sounds of the forest and creatures make around here. Squirrels can sound like buffalo traveling through when it comes to leaves, and the deer generally, not making much sound. At that time, about the only large animal besides deer in that area would have been a coyote. And this weren't no coyote. I also knew that no prey animal would spend any time in close contact with humans. And likewise with the alpha predators, which were coyotes and foxes. There was an occasional bobcat, but rarely seen back then. Although today we got plenty of healthy population of bobcat here, well, this was definitely bipedal. It was slow, and it was heavy. After a period of silence, the route around the camp was repeated. A slow-paced, heavy-footed semicircle until they had reached the starting point again. And this went on for a better part of an hour, with an occasional whistle, once a grunt, low growl. I couldn't tell which. My horse definitely had them made, as she had twisted and turned to keep her ears turned to the sound. Only my touch kept her from blowing a gasket again. Finally, I had experienced enough, and I loudly announced that I was armed, and I would open fire if anybody was out there that didn't leave me alone immediately. With that, I levered a shell into the chamber of my 67-year-old carbine and elevated the barrel so that I didn't actually hit anybody. Well, I fired a shot in the air. The sudden report of the 44-40 round split the early morning darkness and echoed through that river bottom. The sound of the shot made whoever was circling my camp suddenly take off in a loud crashing run through the woods. I'm sorry it's so anticlimactic, but that was it. Nothing else made any sound near my camp for the remainder of the night. While not calm, my mare quit struggling and no longer was letting out frightened whinnies. I sat by the fire and I made a cup of coffee until dawn. At first hint of light, I gathered my gear and saddled my horse. Oh, one more thing. The rope I had tied between the two trees and tied my mare to, it had been pulled so tight by her not long struggling, that I had to cut it with my knife and leave the ends of the rope tied around the trees. Well, this ended my weekend camping. I decided I'd return home. And by the way, once we cleared the area, my mare was back to her old dependable self, as if nothing had ever happened. Never for a moment did my mind explore the possibility that I was being harassed by a Sasquatch. I mean, Sasquatch lived in the Pacific Northwest, not in southeastern Indiana. When I was young, they told me stories about the wood booger back in Kentucky. Now, all these years later, I have no doubt the thing that was around my camp was indeed a Sasquatch. Over the years, I've encountered 2 sets of footprints, one set in the snow and one in the forest. Both sets were found in the Charles C. Dean Wilderness in the Hoosier National Forest while hiking and hunting off trail by compass and topographical map. And both sets were found miles from any existing hiking trail, and further still from any roads. I already sent you some photos that I took. I also found structures in the forest that were made entirely of broken tree branches. The ends of all branches was broken off into trees. The woods had darkened, but it was plainly evident that the branches were not cut. Whatever broke them had to have significant strength to rip them from trees. Additionally, the structures made no sense because they weren't shelters. But this all culminated in 2008, on a dizzy November evening. I experienced a visual contact with a Sasquatch with a witness, my son, who was home on leave from the Army. He and I were driving alongside a field that bordered a river less than a mile from my farm. I looked over and into the field as I drove along, and suddenly I slammed my foot down on the brake, while at the same instant, my son blurted out, "What the heck is that?" That was a 9 to 10 foot tall being striding across the field. It appeared to be all black, had a conical head and very long arms that swung as it walked. The stride of the creature was enormous. Because of this sight near my farm, I won't even sit outside at night on my own yard unless people's with me, and I keep a shotgun loaded with slugs by my side. I don't even like curtains to be open after dark. It makes me nervous. Hope you found this interesting. Steve. My name is Thomas, and I love the shows. I wanted to submit this story in hopes that it's good enough for you guys to use. It goes back to 1977, back when I was in high school in Taylor County, where I grew up in West Virginia. Some friends and I was out, doing the usual teenager stuff, trying to impress the girls. Now, there was an old legend about a witch that lived back up in the woods not far from where we were. Now, mind you, I never put too much stock into anything like that or the paranormal. The girl I liked, her name was Missy, and somebody brought up the witch's house weren't that far away. Well, we joked around a little bit about it, and then joked around about who was brave enough to go up there. Well, after some more jokes, Missy's friend Mandy suggested that we all take a stroll up there. Well, we take off. By the time we arrive, it's around 11 p.m. at night. We get up there, and it's just an old house. Nothing scary or anything. It was a bright moonlit night, so we could see pretty clearly. We're joking around when we hear this sound that is so loud it hurts all of our ears. We grab our ears and look in the direction that it's coming from, but saw nothing. Scared, we jump and run back to the car, jump in and sped away. As we're turning around, the headlights fixes upon a creature. I'm guessing this thing to be 7 to 8 foot tall. Grayish colored skin, extremely wide, and no head. My buddy Gerald, whom was driving, screams, "The Grafton monster." I literally couldn't believe what I was seeing. We sped off, and then we agreed not to tell anybody, because technically we were trespassing up there. But neither of us ever forgot that night. I'm betting neither of us ever will. Sorry this isn't very long, but I hope you and Jared enjoy it. Thanks for everything, guys. Thomas.
Well, folks, thank y'all for listening to this collection of y'all's picks for your favorite stories of 2024.
Yeah, definitely, folks.
We hope y'all enjoyed it. I know we sure did.
Absolutely. I always have, like we always do. And, we also, we want to thank you folks for sticking with us throughout this journey.
Oh, definitely. The channel's grown a ton this year.
Absolutely.
Good number of subscribers. And if you hadn't, be sure and subscribe.
Yeah, subscribe. It's absolutely free. And it's also free to hit that like button, share out, tell all your friends and family. And thanks so much to all you good folks out there who's been doing exactly that.
Oh, yeah. We want to thank you and all of our supporters as well. We got a good number of supporters these days. Alvin, Charles, Chris, Donald, Holly, Jerry King TV. I don't know what
Yeah,
that
it's one of them
is.
weird names, man.
Jared King TV. Be sure and check him out. James, Gene, Jeff, Johnny, Jordan, Julia, Linda, Kim, Larry, Linda, Michelle, Misty, Mitzi, Nancy. Two Nancys, by the way. Two Nancys.
Yeah, Nancy and Nancy.
Yeah, Nancy and Nancy. Taylor, Ryan, and Werewolf Radar Podcast. Be sure to check them out on YouTube as well.
Great bunch of folks.
Yep. And man, 2024 just went. It went by like
It,
you know.
it did, man. I mean, it's been an amazing ride, and it's been so much fun. And getting all these amazing stories from folks, getting to meet new folks, and getting to know our usual folks even more. So I mean, it's just hands down, just amazing.
Yeah, it's been an awesome year. We thank y'all so much. We hope you had a good Christmas and you have an excellent new year.
Absolutely, folks. Have an amazing one, a blessed one, and we look forward to going into 2025 with you guys. And just thanks for being there. And we can't wait for the New Year's to roll in, to start out with a whole new group of stories for you folks. And it's just going to be an amazing ride with everything we've got planned coming and everything.
So be on the lookout for that. We've got some really cool stuff planned for sure. And don't forget, stay spooky.
Stay spooky.
Night, folks.